Hey guys,
Good morning.
Hello.
Happy
happy
Monday.
Sip Day.
Sip day. Happy Monday.
Yes. So, a topic that has been on my mind is sort of generational wealth and how you build it. Specifically, if maybe you're not coming from a spot of wealth, right? It's a different kind of framework once you have it. You want to keep it going to your kids. But how do you sort of build it and start it up coming from sort of nothing?
Well, first, congrats. Everybody on this call is born in the United States of America, which, if we're talking wealth, it's a subjective term in the sense if we're looking at it around the globe doing that, right? So just by nature of being in the US, which the majority of our listeners are, all of our clients are, that's going to be a significant head start for this. And then when we're thinking wealth, are we talking about being able to, pass tens of millions of dollars down, or are we talking about being able to have a kind of sustenance and leisure time in life doing that? Because then another benefit is all of us are born in this time, meaning the most prosperous time in all of human history of doing that, right? So concepts like retirement would have been foreign to, say, our great 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 grandparents, right? That wasn't a thing. So I think the first two things to acknowledge are the place being the most prosperous country in the history of the world, and the time being the advances that we've seen in civilization that have allowed us to kind of have these conversations and do this from, three different places around the state, communicating with each other. I'm in my house working and talking to you. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, Katie, when you say that.
Yeah, like defining what wealth means to you, right? Yeah. Tucker,
Yeah,
what?
so I like there's the kind of the next thing that we think about too is commonly when you think of high net worth families, you're often like making this assumption that I'm an older millennial, so like we kind of grew up in like the Paris Hilton time when she was got big in pop culture from like the Hilton family doing that. So when we think of like generational wealth, oftentimes we think of like families like that. Well, they just inherited from it. And I like this graphic that shows, where essentially the affluent in America got their money from.
Oh, I like
So if you're starting on, let's say, home plate here, it says inherited sufficient wealth to make the Forbes 400 list, 21% of it. So to use my example, yes, the Paris Hiltons of the world, they certainly exist, right? That's 20 or 1/5% of the people in the Forbes 400.
it. Mm-hmm.
Third base in this example is inherited wealth in excess of 50 million or larger prosperous company. So again, $50 million, maybe not putting you on the Forbes 400 list, but pretty affluent family. I think by any definition of wealth, that's going to qualify. But that's about 28%. So let's call that one fourth. So one fourth effectively is, what we're expecting in terms of multi-generational wealth. So Kate, I think what you wanted to focus the conversation on was really like this other three fourths. So
Mm-hmm.
second base here is receiving wealth of $1 million. First base is less than $1 million receiving that, but maybe, affluent family or middle class family doing it. 38%. So a greater percentage of the Forbes 400 came from lower or middle class than did from affluent families.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of the opposite of, I think, what we would initially expect in the sense that of the 400 wealthiest Americans, more of them came from lower or middle class backgrounds than from high class or extremely affluent backgrounds.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of not necessarily what you would expect, but that's interesting to see that in the graphic.
Yeah, of the nation's millionaires, what percentage do you think, uh, like 80% of those did not inherit more than 10% of their wealth?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a very small percent because even some of those that were affluent maybe went off and created businesses of their own so that the inheritance they receive is still less than 10% of their overall wealth. So sure, Hilton families exist, right? They are there, but it's a lesser percentage we think.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting, right? I feel like there's this like tandem of risk and reward and these individuals, and I'd be intrigued to like get into the qualitative data of that study in that like three quarters or two-thirds, whatever it was that sort of came from nothing, right? It's like what sort of risks are they taking? What sort of age are they taking them at? What does wealth mean to them? Sort of how do they define that and sort of create that pathway? What sort of businesses are they running? Are they leaders in their industry? When do they come in? There's so many factors that sort of determine your pathway. So it's not sort of a one size fits all. I'm going to see that and do it. And with technology changing so rapidly, you can like sort of build these businesses online these days and sort of do it, right? It's wild to think about how that will change even in today's time and like how our kids will handle that and create their own generational wealth.
That I think that'll change, but there's also to your point about the data. It's a little bit like out of vogue right now to kind of talk about this, but the data shows that something called a success sequence was popularized kind of in the mid 90s, like the Clinton era doing it.
Hmm.
Um, the success sequence is finish school, get a job, they get married before kids. So you don't necessarily have to have kids in that example, but basically the point is don't if you have kids before you finish school or before you get a job, or you don't finish school and get a job before then, if you basically mess that success sequence up, maybe we're not talking here about billionaires doing that, but we're talking about to be able to achieve, say, middle class in America, like that success sequence, Katie, to your point, like it might change what the jobs are next generation for our kids. It might change how wealth is created, it might change what the companies are. But like I have a hard time imagining that success sequence is different, right? Of finish school, might be high school, might be trade school, might be college, but essentially finish school, finish what you set out to do, get a job, any job, and then get married before having kids.
Yeah.
Like that success sequence tends to start that generational wealth we're talking about, right? So you might not necessarily achieve it, but it'll start it or it'll break a cycle of, maybe previous generations that didn't have those advantages.
Yeah.
We've all seen that in our lives, right? Anecdotally, of it's more somebody from a single parent household may succeed, may be very smart, maybe very successful, but it's an additional challenge, right? Somebody from a different ethnic background, if it's an immigrant to the country, like it's going to have a different set of challenges. Certainly can achieve and overcome that,
Yeah.
but it becomes harder to do. So those building blocks effectively of that success sequence, going back to my first point of just kind of the time and place where we are, I struggle to see how that can change for, across generations.
Yeah, and I think it's only getting better. I think about it in the context of being a woman, right? And like the pressures that my mom faced versus the pressures my grandparents faced and sort of that success sequence and how different that looks for me than sort of my great grandmother who came off the boat from Lithuania. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you add those other challenges in, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to
Yeah.
watch.
It is. And I always find it interesting having the conversations with your parents, your grandparents, if they're still, alive, your great grandparents, and just hearing the differences. I know for a fact whenever I talk to my grandparents, they think it's wild that, like you said, Joe, we can be in three different parts of the state, all, working from houses, working from offices, all having the same conversations. And, maybe they have some choice words about how easy we have it, but um,
Different challenges.
different challenges, right? But it's very interesting listening to the different generations, the building of the generational wealth, what people did to start that, when they started it. It's interesting, and it's cool to kind of take that from all the different generations and see how things are evolving. And like you said, Katie, it's going to be interesting to see what our kids and our grandkids are going to have,
Yeah.
and how they're going to accomplish that,
Yeah.
I think.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys.
It's Katie.